everyone, and welcome to week 5 of Great Decisions 2026 at Manitowoc Public Library. Hard to believe that we're already halfway done with the lecture series for this year, but just a fantastic array of lectures this year, and there's no reason for you to think that that's going to end this evening, because every speaker we have this year is just absolutely amazing. So, before I turn things over to Professor Pal, I am going to, as always, thank our sponsors, because without them, we wouldn't be able to get these great speakers. So, first and foremost, the League of Women Voters of Manitowoc County. Please hold your applause till okay. The Manitowoc Public Library Foundation, the Manitowoc Public Library, and the Lakeshore Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. Now a big round of applause. Also, I wanted to call your attention to something in case you need a break from geopolitics. Just if maybe. I can't think of a reason why you might need that, but this Saturday from 1 to 2:30 p.m., we're partnering with the Master Gardeners of Manitowoc County to have a class in the Volkansky that is called Branching Out. It is a tutorial on when best to prune your shrubs and bushes and how best to prune your shrubs and bushes so that they're happy shrubs and bushes. So that happens this Saturday from 1 to 2:30 p.m. in the Volkansky room. And that is my only announcement for the evening. So allow me to introduce our speaker for tonight. Amitabh Pal has spent decades in the journalism and education fields. He currently is the communications director for a nonprofit focused on secular issues, teaches political science courses at Edgewood College in Madison, Wisconsin, and co-hosts a global affairs show on Madison's community radio station, WORT 89.9 FM. He was for many years the managing editor of the Progressive magazine, a national publication founded by Wisconsin Governor Robert La Follette in 1909. Ladies and gentlemen, Amitabh Pal.
Thank you so much, Tim, and thank you all for inviting me again. It already feels a bit like family. I've been here now twice, maybe an annual ritual. And I hope for you all the year went by, at least on a personal level, as well as it went for me. We celebrated my mother's 80th in Germany, where I was born, over the summer. And just a week ago, my younger daughter left for South Korea because she's in a semester abroad program through the University of Wisconsin. So she's there through June. My wife went to drop her, and I hope to visit her when her semester ends in June, July. So that'll be exciting, since even though my roots are in India, paradoxically, I haven't really visited that many countries in Asia. Because when I go to Asia, I go to India. I don't really go to too many other countries. So I was trying to think, and Nepal may be the only other one. And if you want to think of the Middle East as being part of Asia, which technically it is, then I've been to Dubai, which is very much in the news now, unfortunately. My cousin lives near Dubai in Sharjah. So on a personal level, it's been great. On a political level, of course, there's meant to be, and it may be completely made up, but meant to be a saying in Mandarin, Chinese, that may you live in interesting times. So that's what we are all fated or cursed to be undergoing, basically. And there's so much happening in the news that it's sometimes hard to keep up. And I really think it's invaluable, though, that places like Manitowoc and all over Wisconsin have this great decision series, because as we were discussing over dinner, whether we like it or not, as residents of this country, we have a huge global impact, and in ways that we don't even often realize. Today I'll be pointing out less dramatic instances than what's been happening over the past couple of days in Iran and the Middle East. Let me start that off by asking you all, do you know anything about the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank? Because we'll be discussing them today, and they're the most powerful financial institutions in the world, bar none. Do you all know where they're headquartered, for example?
No.
You know, it's amazing. I'll tell you where they are. Do you know who controls them?
We do. Yeah.
Yes, that's a good guess or a good answer. And yet, you will find almost no mention of them in the US media. I tell my students that they can basically go through a year of CNN and find almost no mention of theirs. I keep on telling them and semi-jokingly saying that they will get extra credit if they actually look up a year of CNN's coverage and see, actually confirm or negate my thesis that, there'd be hardly any passing mention. The one US media institution that does mention them is the New York Times. That has to be said. But CNN and US television, almost none, if anything whatsoever. And the reason I do bring them up is that we'll be discussing them today, and we'll be discussing them via the lens of this man, who's an interesting person in some sense. He is less prominent and less in the news than his cabinet colleagues. You all must know, if I mentioned Pam Bondi or Kristi Noem or Robert Kennedy Jr. or even Kash Patel, who's not technically even at his level, I would not have to affix the title. They'd be famous by themselves. If I say Scott Bessent, a lot of you would be like, who? And yet, he holds what may be the most important portfolio, Treasury. He is the reason that he's not as much in the news, even though he's as influential, if not more. He's a bit more low-key and a bit less kind of, in your face and a bit less in the news. I think part of his job, a good part of his job, is to reassure, so to speak, Wall Street, and hence sort of, be kind of, like low-key and composed and not be as dramatic, maybe, and as in your face. But at the same time, he has a very interesting background too. He used to work with the Soros, yes, that George Soros Foundation, in some capacity, which is interesting that he is with the Trump administration. He also identifies as gay, which is also interesting that he's such a top official in the Trump administration. But he's come there and fit in. And these remarks today are of his that we'll be discussing very much reflect and kind of amplify the U.S. Perspective on those two international financial institutions. And so, have any of you guessed where the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank are headquartered? Any guesses?
Switzerland?
Yes, it's Washington, D.C. Very much Washington, D.C. In fact, as this says, blocks from the White House. Blocks, literally blocks from the White House. This person here, and I'm sorry that we may have to sort of get into a bit of a history lesson, for better or for worse. And I think, I tell my class this is an important history lesson, so hopefully I won't bore you with a bit of background. This person with the thicker mustache, his name is John Maynard Keynes, Keynes. As I say, the third most famous and influential economist in history. The first one being Adam Smith, the founder of modern free market capitalism. The second one being Karl Marx, the founder of Marxism or communism. Third one, him. And as my joke goes, you have it made in philosophy or economics when there is an adjective named after you. Keynesian economics. So what is or was Keynesian economics? The whole notion that was adopted famously by FDR in this country and by the Labour government, most prominently in Britain in the 1940s at the end of the war. The notion being that capitalism by itself does not often function optimally. That there are moments and times when there is stagnation in the economy, and then the government has to step in and make sure that the system gets back on the tracks. And one way to do it is basically again, this may be made up, but Keynes is supposed to have said, if it comes to this, have people dig a hole in the morning and fill it back in at night and pay them for both. So as I said, he may or may not have said this, it's disputed. But so Keynes, John Maynard Keynes, who was a very famous Keynesian economist, of course, and a very, very prominent economist. FDR was heavily influenced by him. He and a bunch of FDR's economists, end of World War II, this fancy, you can see that building. It's a hotel now, and if I ever go to Vermont, which I haven't, I will be visiting that hotel out of curiosity, since I've spoken about that hotel so often. It is in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, and the whole system of governing the international economy, because it was founded at Bretton Woods, it's called the Bretton Woods system, or these are the Bretton Woods institutions, the IMF and the World Bank. So Keynes from Britain, and he led a delegation, he wasn't there all by himself, and American economists got together and basically established the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. There were some differences. Keynes actually had somewhat of a different vision for the World Bank and the IMF. Surprise, surprise, the American one prevailed. They were being founded here in the US. One thing he said, for example, do not have the World Bank and the IMF headquartered in DC. It is too obvious and too embarrassing almost. Because then, the Treasury Department is right there, the White House is right there, and the fact that the United States controls these institutions would be too apparent. They didn't listen to him. There were other differences too. He wanted them much more to manage the global economy in a way that would be much more of benefit to developing countries. Even under FDR, much of that was shunted to the wayside. So in 1944 onwards, these institutions are set up, the IMF and the World Bank. Some input, Latin America was the only independent region. Remember 44? No country in Asia almost, no country in Africa almost is independent. So there was some input from Latin America, and they did try to push back. But again, the dominant power being the United States, the US prevails even over Britain, which is declining then and soon has to get rid of its colonies. So the IMF and the World Bank have both been dominated by the United States since their founding. Every head of the World Bank is from the US. Interestingly, currently, I'm trying to think, there's been so much happening over the past year. Is he still there, or has the Trump administration gotten rid of him? He's born in India, but he is a US citizen, because I don't know if there's any bylaw, but certainly by tradition and consensus, every head of the World Bank has to be from the US. every head of the IMF is from Europe. And they work in conjunction. And the domination is so obvious and so in your face that it is not even one country, one vote. It is based on who's funding these institutions. And since the United States provides a good portion, the US vote is 25 times that of 25 times that of India and 20 times that of China. And in conjunction with Europe, the United States and the Europe, i.e. the West, control both these institutions. What do they do? What do they do? You're like, what are these institutions? And how come I've never heard of them? I assure you, you go to Pakistan, you go to India, you go to Ghana, you go to Latin America, every semi-informed person will be able to tell you what the IMF does. What the IMF does is whenever these countries are in dire straits, you know what advantage we have in the United States? We don't even realize it. Why don't we have to worry? Well, at least till now, things may change in the future. Why don't we have to worry about our external debt? Why don't we? Any guesses as to why it's not a worry for us, and it's a worry for every other country pretty much, from Pakistan to Ghana to India to everywhere. Why don't we have to worry about our external debt or our deficit?
Other people give us their money.
In dollars, because the dollar is the currency of choice. The dollar is the currency of reserve. The dollar is the currency of trade. And hence it's our own money. Not so for Pakistan, which has rupees. Not so for, you know what I'm saying? I mean, not so for, Latin American countries which have the peso, etc. They have to then pay back their debt in dollars, and they have shortfalls. And then who steps in? The International Monetary Fund, and says, here's money for you. But hey, this money doesn't come free. It doesn't. It comes with strings attached. You have to restructure your economy in a way that we like it. And how does the US like it? For open it up to US multinational corporations, open it up to US banks, open it up to US trade. That's only then we will give you the money. So that's why it's so surprising to me. And don't take my word for it. Here is somebody, and I know I'm name dropping, but I interviewed this wonderful man. See, it's there that Joseph Stiglitz. He won the Nobel, and in economics, he was fired. I'm not making this up. He was fired from being the chief economist of the World Bank because he said this openly, that the IMF, from representing global economic interests, is now serving US financial interests. Lawrence Summers, who I don't know if you know, his name was brought up in conjunction with the Epstein files. He was the Secretary of Treasury under Clinton and got him fired. So, and he was asked, Stiglitz, that were you fired at the behest of the US? And Lawrence Summers, he says, I think so, but you know these people, they leave no fingerprints behind. So this is, I know it's the backdrop, because it surprises me that the World Bank and the IMF are so blatantly controlled by the United States, especially since the Reagan administration. There's been almost no kind of qualms about even showing that. Before that, they used to sort of. So that's the IMF. The World Bank is the junior partners of the IMF. It does two things. One is, again, giving loans, etc. Also, though, and it has to be said, it does sometimes good grassroots projects that it funds. For example, there's a lovely project it has funded, which I show my class a documentary on, in the poorest state in India, of women forming self-help groups and taking out loans, and thus, so again, it's in keeping with their ideology, but they do some good work at the grassroots level. IMF is here, World Bank is partly here, and these two institutions are the most powerful financial institutions in the world. And if I may be honest, you all gave me this topic this time, which is so much on the nose and so much to do with the Trump administration. Last time I had it easier. It was a US, China, India historical overview. I didn't have to deal with current issues as much. I'm giving my kind of, my perspective on his remarks. So Besant, basically, let me put the slideshow. Yeah. Besant is not even satisfied with the way things are. And last April, at this organization or this institution called the International Institute of Finance, he laid out the Trump administration's critique from a very different perspective of the IMF and the World Bank. And one thing he feels is, so the central plank, again, something that's very much in the news of the Trump administration has been to try to rebalance the whole international trading system using tariffs. And of course, that has been so dizzying. I don't know about you all. I've almost stopped keeping track. Every week or two, there's a new development. And I'm like, let the whole thing settle down before I sort of, just pause and know what's happening. It's been that tumultuous. There's been a court ruling against it. Then the Trump administration reimposed a lower tariff, a lower tariff rate on the world. So it's been so much in the news. The central notion of that, I'm a bit of a heretic when it comes to free trade. I don't believe it is as necessarily as much of a good thing as people think it to be. And I've studied the trajectory of countries that have managed to go up the ladder. And we'll see the central one, which has gone up. We'll talk about it in just a bit. But countries like South Korea, where my daughter is right now, went up the ladder not by using free trade, but by being very strategic about it and having this whole kind of industrial policy where the government was guiding things and guiding their big business houses like Daewoo, Samsung, Hyundai, you know the names. They've become globally famous. That's how they became big. So tariffs can be useful provided they are done in a systematic way and provided they are done in conjunction with as part of a broader plan. And if I may be honest, I don't see any broader plan. In fact, South Korea, etc., one of the reasons that they managed to get so much ahead, and we'll get to the other example, the central example in just a moment, is because they dedicated so much of their money to research and advancing science. And of course, that is working at such cross purposes, the whole notion of gutting research and science at institutions of higher learning that's been going on. So I'm not sure how that fits in. I mean, as I said, you can use tariffs, but as part of a bigger plan. Otherwise, tariffs by themselves are not going to do very much. The results have not been too impressive, have they? The manufacturing has just been going down because, and it's been anyway so chaotic and so all over the place, and the results have just not, this is all the way till November 2025. life. By the way, I have to give a shout out to my older daughter, who's been very invaluable in helping me set up this slideshow. She was like, yeah, are you going to mention me? I said, of course, Sagarika, I will. So yeah, the numbers have just been going down, really. And there's not been, if it was part of a broader kind of strategy, then maybe it would have worked. It just hasn't worked. But that is the notion. It goes along with the America First approach that the Trump administration has, and Scott Bessent is exemplifying that. By the way, so was Scott Bessent a known name to you all before this evening? No. You see, he's.
No, I had heard of him.
Yeah. People have maybe heard of him vaguely, but I think generally speaking, one has to give him that ID, that title for it to click in people's brains. Not so much with Pam Bondi or with Robert Kennedy Jr. or with Kristi Noem. They are much more. They've upstaged him. I think he's anyway more of a low-key guy, and he's happy doing what he's doing and not being that much in the limelight unless he has to be. So the main obsession of the United States recently has been the trade imbalance with China. And China supposedly being too reliant on US markets and saving too much money. All of this is interesting because back in the 1980s, when China opened up to the global economy, US multinationals decided that there was huge, I'll put it in big quotation marks, cost saving to relocating there. And they formed, this is the most fascinating thing to me, that the biggest multinationals in the world formed a happy alliance with the biggest communist party in the world. Because that communist party kept wages low, didn't allow trade unions to flourish, and so the biggest multinationals were happy with the biggest communist party. Hey! Isn't that an incredible kind of, marriage of convenience? And so, the whole notion became that we are serving US consumers and we are giving them cheap goods. But what was, of course, happening was that all the manufacturing from the United States was being relocated to China and to other countries. And that manufacturing sector was decimated over 20, 30, 40 years in this country. I would argue that part of the appeal of President Trump is due to that, because he promised to bring back jobs to this country. And these were decently paying jobs, and they moved over to the service sector, which were paying a fraction, as you know, working at a factory. From what I hear, this is before my time. I was a child in this country for some time in the 1970s, and then I came back in 1990, but this is meant to be even further back in the 50s and 60s. That in a manufacturing job, you could earn enough to have a decent standard of living and to send your kids to college. And that cannot be if you're working, with all due respect, in the mall or at a fast food joint. And so that transition hurt the American working class tremendously and led to that resentment, which has been in part, lots of factors, confluence of factors, in part responsible for the political rise of Donald Trump. But it's been a historical kind of phenomenon which both the Republican and the Democratic Party supported, and the remedy that the Trump administration has, which is just chaotically imposing tariffs and going up and down on those, and then almost whimsically altering them country by country, really, which was happening. I mean, based on how President Trump's mood was on a particular day toward a particular country. So all of that basically hasn't really helped, it's odd that they've gone on that route, because it will not solve anything at all. The other critique that the Trump administration has of the IMF and the World Bank is, I'm sorry to be honest, I would classify it at best as nitpicking. So they say, obviously, like all international institutions, the IMF and the World Bank have to be seen to be acting on climate change. But at best, that's been a secondary focus. And even within that, they have betrayed their mission by supporting, for example, I just have, my daughter found this nice visual. They support kind of, like coal power plants everywhere. So it's not even that they are consistent about that. And then, of course, you come to this other obsession, if I may, of the Trump administration, which is the whole DEI thing. Again, I don't know. I'll be honest, I didn't do a deep dive into their DEI policies and how committed they are to that. And often these are anyway internal policies, and you're not sure as to how much of it is just the rhetoric out there and how much of it is actual hiring practices. But I don't think, that's the centrality of what these what these organizations are about. And so it's kind of interesting that all this critique has come from Scott Bessent, which I think obscures the central truth, which is that generally speaking, these have been organizations that have served US interests and served US purposes. And I should add this, because here I want to make the linkage with the United Nations clear. You'll be like, and so what did they have to do with the UN? Formally speaking, they are part of the United Nations system. In actuality, the UN doesn't exercise very much authority over them, but they're part of that umbrella of organizations. And that's what's happening here, that the Trump administration is really unhappy with the global system, with globalization, with global institutions. And Bessent's remarks and broadsides against the IMF and the World Bank are not necessarily directed just at the IMF and the World Bank, but they are as a way of undermining the United Nations system, because they're so unhappy. And this unhappiness has been there before also. I mean, even in the Bush II era, for example, Bush Jr.'s administration, there was quite a bit of annoyance at the UN. But even there, remember people, the Bush administration almost went to the UN, almost. The key word is almost, to get approval for the Iraq war. Here, there is no notion of that at all. The UN is thought to be pretty much irrelevant. And Bessent, keeps on complaining that the IMF doesn't call out China on its trade surpluses. Maybe they listen to him because they started doing that. And of course, the IMF has never said anything to the US for its deficits, for having, they usually are critical of having an industrial policy, which is the government directing from behind the scenes. Biden tried that. I don't recall a single IMF comment on that. Biden was trying that. He had that Inflation Reduction Act moving toward green energy. He had the CHIPS Act, CHIPS. I forget what it stands for. Of course, this is I'm being facetious. Not the chips you eat, the other chips, the computer chips, trying to get them relocated to the US. There's a great worry. Which is a country that's a center of production for the chips, computer chips? I'm sorry? Taiwan, yes. And there's a great worry that if China attacks Taiwan, all of that will be gone. so they were right in trying to get that relocated to the US. All of that, I think, has stalled too, as far as I know. So he does question, he does try to appear to be sympathetic to the global south or the developing countries by questioning some of their loan policies. I don't know if it will make much difference on the ground in the way they ask both of them to operate. One big buddy of the Trump administration in Latin America is this gentleman. Anybody knows which country, or anybody knows his name? Yes, he's an Argentinian guy. If I may be honest, he's a bit of a character. He has dogs. Not that there's anything necessary. His dogs are all clones. I'm not making this up. And then one of them died, and he claims to be in seance with the dog spirit. I mean, that sort of thing. Yeah, he's quite an interesting person. Javier Milei, he's the president of Argentina, and talk about IMF bailouts, etc. The Trump administration arranged the bailout through the US Treasury and the IMF, etc. for him because they like him so much. But things over there are grim. My friends went to Argentina just recently, and they said you withdraw money from using your debit card, you can only withdraw some absurdly low amount, like $70 or $80, less than $100. And every time you do it, you have to pay a commission to the government of $10-15. So they were like, okay, they knew about it from before. It's not. It doesn't empty your bank balance necessarily, but it's kind of a pain. It shows the dire straits the country is in and why they had to get a bailout from the United States in order to keep on functioning. So as I said, I read this chapter that I was assigned to critique, and it left me with bafflement, if I may be honest, because the United States has anyway controlled the IMF and the World Bank since forever. I've been tracking that. I teach about that. I've read so much about that, at least since the Reagan administration. Before that, they were much more tolerant of other approaches in developing countries, but since the Reagan administration especially, they have taken a much more hard line to have policies they deem to be the most optimal. They claim for those countries, critics claim for the United States and for the West. So not surprisingly, even the heads of the World Bank, for example, are ex-administration officials. Paul Wolfowitz was first in the Bush administration and then went on to head the World Bank. Robert McNamara, the Vietnam War guy, headed the World Bank for many years after. So you can see what a seamless transition it is there. And very, very obvious that they run according to the dictates of the US. What really rankles Besant also, I think, is China's rise. China was not supposed to rise up like this. Now, the Chinese government is very problematic. Let's not be in two minds about that. But at the same time, the economic rise has been really remarkable. $200 a year before they abandoned the Maoist system and set up this mixed economic system. Late 70s, India and China both had $200 per year per capita income. India is now about $2,500, $3,000 per year. Good enough. You would say, yeah, 10 times, 15 times. Guess how much China is at? I checked recently. Any guesses? 13,000. So 65 times. Of course, there's been some inflation, so you need to adjust for that. But just in nominal terms, they've also moved up the value ladder, which was J.D. Vance's complaint that China was meant to produce only primary goods. You all must know, if you follow the news even slightly, from EV to AI. To cutting-edge technologies, they are now producing, I recently read, 70% of 6 core cutting-edge technologies is produced in China. And that's a major complaint. I think that they were not meant to go up the value ladder that they have. So, that's my sort of comment about the critique of Besant, that I just find it a bit puzzling because, the United States anyway controlled these institutions, but I suppose not completely exactly in the way that the Trump administration wanted, which is why this critique. But I mean, the UN, and as other people have pointed out, the UN really has served the United States very, very well in so many ways. And here is somebody answering, a CNBC correspondent whose name is, probably I'm butchering it, Betul Yuruk. And it's kind of a rejoinder in some sense to Besant's remarks. How many of you have seen the UN headquarters? Have any of you been to? Now you are. That's great. That's wonderful. Isn't it nice? My wife and my daughters went to New York recently, and I highly recommended it to them. They didn't have the time though. It's nice now to get to see it. It's wonderful. I've heard that area of New York was pretty run down, and it was full of butcher shops and slaughterhouses, interestingly. It used to be called Blood Alley. And Rockefeller was the person who initiated or sort of helped in the purchase of that big area for the UN headquarters. And actually it does New York City a whole bunch of good. There are all these diplomats and support staff, and they say it's responsible directly, indirectly, because there's a whole ecosystem of jobs that comes up for around a major organization like that, for 25,000 jobs or so, really. And it's a nice swanky sort of building, and there are some complaints that diplomats get away with parking tickets and stuff. So there is some kind of, thankfully there's been no violations beyond that I can think of, but that sort of thing. But generally speaking, New Yorkers are happy that the UN is there. It adds to the diversity, it adds to its touristy charms, and contributes a huge amount to the economy. And through the Security Council, the United Nations, of course, the United States being one of the permanent five, US, China, Russia, France, and Britain, it really serves US interests in terms of getting things done. And if the United States decides to retreat, then it's China that'll be helped, and not and it'll be ceding the ground internationally to China, which is what the worry is. This will blow your mind if you haven't been keeping up with the news. The United States has withdrawn from 66, I'm not bringing this up, this actually completely startled me too, 66 UN entities under the Trump administration. I mean, incredible, basically. And the most prominent being the World Health Organization, Human Rights Council, UNESCO, which is the cultural organization, but there are others too. And all of this will really debilitate the UN to the extent that Antonio Guterres, who's the Secretary General, has warned that the UN is in danger of imminent financial collapse, because the United States is just not willing to fund it and is not willing to pony up the money. And of course, historically, for better for worse, it's been according to your economy that you have funded the UN. So the United States has had the biggest share. And now openly, I mean, there's been this notion that the UN is not needed. Mike Waltz, who was the National Security Advisor, do you remember that scandal where they were talking, the chats leaked about the United States attacking the Houthis in Yemen, and so he was shunted out to the UN. He's now the United States ambassador to the UN, and he says that money in the UN is being spent on all these woke projects rather than what it was originally intended to do, and so the United States is basically not willing to contribute or pay its fair share. And now, I don't know how much you have heard about this institution that has been hastily set up, if I may be honest. The Board of Peace. Do you all know about this?
Yeah.
So that's essentially and ostensibly been set up for managing Gaza. But the worry is the worry is that the Trump administration sees that board not just as a way of administering and managing Gaza, and that whole institution is so, again, let me be charitable, seat of the pants. It's hard to know where it's going, who's going to be a member. Every day its contours change, its membership changes, and it's countries decline, then they accept, then they withdraw. But people are saying that it's meant to be much beyond just managing Gaza. It is possibly in the long term being set up as a rival to none other than the United Nations. And if that happens, it is really a source for worry. I'm a proponent, I'll be honest, and I hope you all see it, being interested in foreign policy and being involved in the Great Decision series, that hopefully we are at least sort of on the same wavelength. I tell my classes that the UN does a lot of good. Unfortunately, we don't necessarily see it. It is in less dramatic ways. Like the UNICEF, the Children's Fund, UNESCO, which has World Heritage sites all over the world that it highlights and helps preserve. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, which helps in refugee resettlement. Just, like a bunch of things. The World Health Organization, I know, has become a bit controversial over COVID, but it does good work. These are just some of the organizations, that people, peacekeeping. There have been some spectacular failures that we can talk about some other time, but generally speaking, UN peacekeeping has helped keep the peace and reduce violence in many, many regions around the world. And all of this will be placed in jeopardy if the United Nations is shunted to the side and effectively replaced de facto by the Board of Peace or whatever. So Besant's remarks and critique should be seen in that broader context, that the Trump administration does not care for the UN and any related bodies like the IMF and the World Bank, and is against global institutions, is against global authority and any global bodies. And that's why Besant said what he did. I'd like to end with a lovely quote from Dag Hammarskjöld. Dag Hammarskjöld was the UN Secretary General, and he was from Sweden, and he was killed while in the Congo trying to bring about peace. His plane was downed. Let me amend that. His plane came down. There's still a big controversy over whether it was downed or whether it was an accident. And let me give away the major suspect in the plot. It was meant to be the Belgians. Why the Belgians? You're like, what? The Belgians? They're good guys. Why would they be bringing down the UN Secretary General? Any guesses? I'm sorry? Yes, they were, I'm sad to say, and I'm sorry to say, up to no good in the Congo. And again, I'm sorry to add the name of the Eisenhower administration, colluded to kill the first democratically elected head of the Congo, Patrice Lumumba, back in the early 60s. And he was there, and in their view, he was interfering and not serving their interests. The CIA and the Belgians got together. And so, I know, bit of a conspiracy theory, not yet proven, but a lot of people feel that he was killed because he was getting in the way. Regardless, he has a lovely quote, isn't it? I just love this quote, that the United Nations can't, and it's impossible for a single organization to take us to heaven, but certainly It was created to save humanity from hell. And regardless of the critiques, I have my own critique, the Trump administration has a very different critique. We need to sort of, as people who are global minded and globally oriented, have faith, so to speak, in the United Nations, and realize that it is doing so much good work and that it needs to be supported in whatever way we can. Thank you all so much.
All right, let's move on to the Q&A portion. Just remember, until everyone who's wanted to ask a question gets to ask that question, you only get one question. So, I know. I found out last week that was called the Wrath of Tim. I don't know that even existed.
That's a good one.
Let's get started. Stacey will be working the north side. I'll be working the south side. Just get your hand up and we'll get around to you. Oh, there you go.
Thank you, Jim.
You're welcome.
Professor, operationally, so the World Bank and the IMF, are they funded off an original investment that's a revolving loan fund that rebuilds itself through the interest paid back to them? Or is there an annual contribution that...
Annual contribution. That's a good question, though. I should see how much of it is them getting back the interest on their loans and stuff. But it is majorly contributions.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's still the same question.
Yeah.
All right. Is that another investment that Trump might consider passing on to corporations and taking away?
Yes, very much so. Very much so. Yes, very much so. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
That's our only question. Stacey? Oh, I thought you had a question.
Yeah, so, well, and they're kind of together. What percent of the UN's budget does the United States provide? And I heard that, I think like the Human Rights Commission, didn't they put, wasn't it Iran or Afghanistan?
Yeah.
I think that was one of the reasons.
One of the reasons that they gave. Yes. 1/4-ish is the answer I have. 1/4-ish. So it's about 22-24% or so historically, and I think that is adjusted, sort of tweaked every some years. But last time I checked, it was about 22% or so that the United States contributed. Again, because the United States historically has been 1/4 of the global economy. So it's in keeping with that, basically. Yeah.
Darlene, heading your way. Wait for the microphone, Darlene.
I'm just wondering how are loans made to the IMF and World Bank, and what is the responsibility for the people that get the loans? And it's kind of foggy to me.
Yeah. So the IMF, for example, just basically loans made from them, you mean, or to them?
Well, both, really.
Yeah, so the gentleman there asked that question. I think, and I should do a bit of a deeper dive into it. But majorly, my understanding is that the IMF and the World Bank are funded by contributions from the US and other countries.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's the way it's done. They do make some money back on their loans, so they are making money that way also. But my understanding has been that historically, majorly contribution funded. Their loans, in turn, are made, say, to the government. Pakistan is coming to mind because, of course, my roots are in India and Pakistan. I'm like, sorry, people, you have done something wrong. Guess how many times Pakistan has been in existence? My Pakistani friends hear this, they'll be a bit saddened. But Pakistan has been in existence 75 years or so. Guess how many times they've had to go to the IMF for a loan?
75.
No, not that much. No. Somebody else said something?
20.
Yes, you're right, 25. I'm like, how can you be in dire straits, such dire straits that every 3 years you have to go to them? So you basically approach them. then the team comes to your country and gives you the loan, then sits down with you and says you have to do this, that, and the other in order to restructure your economy according to our liking. And then you have to do it, basically. You have to do what they say, otherwise you won't get the money. You won't get the next tranche or the next installment unless you go along with what they're saying. So that's the way it's done. World Bank, as I said, is often funding grassroots projects. And they do those projects on the ground result in some goodness. One shouldn't be a curmudgeon and say, oh, well, India has say 1,400 million people that's only benefiting, say 500 women or whatever. 500 women, that's wonderful. You know what I'm saying? That itself is wonderful. Even if you're making a positive change in a small scale way, that's a wonderful and a great thing. Yeah.
You've alluded to the fact that we're in a ready, fire, aim approach to governance.
Yeah.
I'm trying to understand where we go with the IMF and the UN and so forth moving forward, and seeing is there a route back to where we were, or is this just a new paradigm that we're entering?
I'm optimistic. And there's been a bit of a back and forth during the Bush administration. Also, there was a very harsh critique of the UN, etc., and then it went back to the way sort of things were. But you're right. I hope there's not a permanent paradigm shift, and maybe I hope I'm not being too optimistic that when next time around when there is a turnover and there's a change of administration, I'm thinking it hopefully will go back to the way things were pre-2024. Or pre-January 2025.
Yes. Argentina received, I believe, a few years ago a loan or something,
Yeah.
28 or 30 million. Did they get that from the IMF or World Bank, or was that out of the U.S. Treasury?
So very recently, they both, in my understanding, a bit from the IMF and a bit from the U.S. Treasury. It was a combination of that, and he was in dire straits in the elections, in parliamentary elections. It's a presidential system, but the legislative elections and the loans made all the difference. His party actually did very well, so it was a direct kind of electoral interference. But my understanding is it was a bit of both. Yeah.
You spent quite a bit of time talking about Scott Bessent and his influence. What caused him to transition from George Soros to Donald?
I think he became.
Money thing.
It seems that he sort of knew Trump through family. And kind of became cozy with him and cozier over time, and they forgave the fact that, so to speak, that he was with George Soros for a time, and that he is very much a Wall Street financial type guy, and they need somebody on that front. They do worry about what Wall Street and the financial sector thinks of them, so they need somebody with that background to be reassuring. So they were like, he seems to serve the purpose. Yeah.
You kind of implied, this is how I understood it, that countries in dire straits can get a loan, but what exactly are the criteria? Who decides? Because you implied that it's mostly serving U.S. interests, economic interests.
Yeah.
And say there's a country in dire strait, which is not liked by the U.S., say North Korea.
Or I'll give you a real life example. Chile in the early 70s had a democratically elected communist government.
So
they were starved.
Who decides?
Indirectly, the U.S.
And
really.
what exactly? Also, one more question.
Yeah.
What is exactly the difference between the function of the bank, the IMF, and the World Bank?
So as I said, IMF is sky high, doing kind of loans at the macro level to the governments in these countries. World Bank at least partly acting as a junior partner in some ways, but partly doing grassroots initiatives and kind of, like ground level loans and projects too. And they also sometimes do give funding to governments also. But, so generally the IMF is, much more kind of, at this level, and the World Bank is to oversimplify, at the ground level. Yeah.
Did I understand you to say that the IMF receives funds through contributions?
Yes.
Who contributes to the IMF and what is their purpose in contributing?
The United States, for example, as I said, basically a good portion of the funding comes from the US, and through the IMF, if I may be honest, if the IMF is asking other countries to restructure their economies to the interests of the United States, that's the way it's done. And what it also does is provide, if I may, plausible deniability in some sense, because the IMF is the one doing it, not the US. You see what I'm saying? And yet it is serving US interests. So the United States and the West.
There's a purpose behind the contributions.
Yes. Very much so. Very much so.
And those receiving.
Do any of these loans actually get repaid?
Good question. Mostly they do. Otherwise, they do. Otherwise, they won't get it. Their credit score, so to speak, in the international system would just be, like completely junked, wouldn't it?
That's the only recourse if they don't get paid?
Yes, and mostly they do. And Argentina in the past, not now, but back in 2001 too, did default. And so, yes. So then what happens is they are starved of international credit for some time until people forget about the default. But they have been default, so that's a good question. But that's not the norm. The norm is for the loans to be repaid. Otherwise, they won't be getting any further funding, basically, internationally.
Over here.
So, I don't know if this is relevant, but remember the recession in 2008, 2009?
Yeah.
How or if did the International Monetary Fund deal with that? Was it involved in giving loans to places like Greece?
Very much so. Yeah, it was.
So was that a positive contribution then, overall?
Not really. I'll be honest. And the reason is that they were imposing all these measures on Greece, etc., which were very, very harsh and very socially counterproductive. Yeah. So the IMF was involved, even in Europe, in Greece especially, it was involved. The one thing that the financial crisis did, in terms of the IMF's outlook, it altered its perspective, and they stopped pushing countries in the developing countries to have a US-style financial system, where Wall Street and a lot of wheeling dealing and a lot of derivatives and fancy credit instruments. And Stiglitz, Joseph Stiglitz, I know I'm name dropping the Nobel winner, you know what he told me? The reason that China and India escaped the crisis is because their financial systems were not that way. They're much more government dominated, and that's why, and much more chilled and almost of the past. So after that, the IMF stopped pushing that as much because they realized the amount of damage that was done globally because of the shenanigans of Wall Street. It brought down the whole global system. And in the end, basically, because of all these derivatives and these, what were they called? CDOs, and we don't need to get into all that, but there was a lot of fancy stuff that they were peddling, and in the end, we all were left basically, to make that whole. In the end, it was a massive bailout on our part. Yeah.
But the Chinese must be doing the same thing, right?
In what sense?
In places like Africa and.
Very much so. Very much so.
I mean, they're making loans.
Yes, very much so. Yes. So my sardonic joke is that now developing countries have two bad choices. China or the IMF. Really, you're right. In fact, in Sri Lanka, they seized the port because as they had it as collateral, and Sri Lanka was unable to pay back its loans to China, so they took control of this port in Sri Lanka. So you're right. I mean, China has been implicated in the same bad practices in its own way. Yeah.
Our deficit is getting greater all the time.
Yes.
Where are we getting this money from?
As I said, until the dollar is the currency of choice for trading, for reserves, for foreign currency, the United States has it made. In good times and bad times, foreign investors are investing in US Treasury bonds. Because in bad times, it is seen as a safe haven. In good times, hey, the United States is doing the best. So really, I mean, that is something, and that is a source of worry for US policymakers. That what if the dollar stops becoming the currency of choice for the world in terms of its their reserves, in terms of trading, in terms of because that would imperil the U.S. position. But as long as that deficit, as long as the currency of choice globally is the dollar, our deficits will keep on getting financed one way or the other.
But you're talking about debt, not deficit, right? You're talking about
The debt. Yeah.
Over here.
So I know I'm not supposed to ask you questions, but don't you think the United States is in the process of isolating itself in ways that other countries don't trust it in terms of trade or in foreign policy, et cetera, so that in a way, the United States, even though it does control these sources of wealth, isn't it sort of burning its bridge?
No, completely. I agree. I mean, the question is whether that's permanent or, I mean, that's the question that somebody asked. Huh? Is that a paradigm change or will it go back to normal, so to speak, come, January 2029, whatever normal is? Basically, yeah. So, I mean, we are living in such uncertain times, and I mean, it's interesting. I'm still like maybe some of you. I'm a print guy. I like reading but by the time even the New York Times, I get it the next morning. The news is already dated. I mean, it's just things are so uncertain and so fast moving, and so it's hard to make a cogent analysis of what's going on almost. Yeah.
I just wonder who does make all this money, that when the banks lend money to poor countries. I mean, my husband worked for the largest bank in the world at one point, and he was lending money to different companies or countries, never any companies. But when there are so many companies, the countries failed, they were selling the debt for 20 cents on the dollar.
Yeah.
But do you know who made all that money? The banks.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, they fly to Geneva for a 2-day meeting.
Yeah.
And they charge it all off to the poorest country in the world.
Yes.
So, I mean, we can't blame it all on just the banks, the UN, the IMF.
No. And
everybody had their hand in it.
Yes, and what happens? The IMF, when these countries are in dire straits and IMF lends them money, the first priority is to repay the private banks that have lent them money in the past. Really, above and over everything else, it is that you have to repay those banks. even if you have to cut services, you have to cut jobs, you have to cut everything else. So the IMF, etc., are serving again Western financial interests. Yeah, if I may be honest.
Anyone else?
Second one.
No, that's okay. That's all right. If no one has a first question, let's get to you.
I think one of the saddest things.
Wait for the mic.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just told you that.
Good luck with that. I thought that one of the saddest things of the Trump administration was one of those early actions where he cut off the USAID.
Oh, that's heartbreaking. Heartbreaking.
And
That's a related but different issue. Yeah, but heartbreaking. Heartbreaking.
terrible, terrible,
Yeah, yeah.
terrible thing.
Yeah.
It's, I don't know. Has there been any movement elsewhere in the world to help some of those people that, they're, to help the situation, or, what can you say about that?
Yeah, no, my understanding is that China was mentioned. I don't think China has been able to step in and or Europe. Europe is undergoing its own austerity type notions, and Britain, etc., are not helping. So yeah, just to give one example, and this was set up by the Bush administration, PEPFAR, President's Emergency something for AIDS relief. And it really helped a lot in Africa in terms of countering, the effect of HIV/AIDS, and all of that has been gutted. And I've heard that it's going to lead to so many premature deaths over the next some years. And this was a bipartisan initiative set up in 2005 under the Bush administration, and then, carried forward by. Then, of course, Obama administration, and then the Biden administration. Even Trump won. Didn't at least tear it apart, and now it's almost gone. Yeah, so now my understanding is that there's been immense suffering caused, and nobody else has been able to step up to the plate in a way that helps mitigate that in a large scale at least.
So, Professor, is there a database, is there a website, is there something that you go to identify all of these agencies that have been defunded or decimated by the current administration that would give, the running total's got to be big. He said an X number of UN agencies that we've defunded.
Yeah.
It would be interesting for the average citizen to be able to take a look at that and go like, how the hell are we ever going to recover from that?
Yeah.
So is there a database that you look at, or is that an amalgamation of databases that you?
Yeah. I just follow. Yes, exactly. There's not a single database. And then, of course, internally, what Doge has done, and then externally, they're all related, but it's different. Yeah, so I don't know if there's a single database that tracks all of that comprehensively. If there is, I can let Tim know if I find a sort of a single comprehensive source on that.
Or maybe the reference desk here can look for it.
Sure.
No, but if you do find something, I can, I'll post something on Facebook
Sure.
and let people know that I have some sources.
Sure.
And I'll put my email on there and you can contact me. Anyone else?
Right here.
If the dollar is the currency that's now used
Yeah.
for international trade, what's number two? What could conceivably replace it? Because
There were some worries about the euro stepping in. That did not happen. The Chinese currency is another alternative maybe, but Japan was at its peak. Then the yen was thought to be a rival, but Japan, let's just say the air went out of that their economy some years ago. An Edgewood student of mine went to Japan after graduation, but he was there doing an internship between taking my courses, and he said, you'll be surprised in Japan, the floppy disk is still used. So they stopped. I mean, I think now they've gotten rid of it finally a year or two ago. So yeah, that's the answer. Euro, maybe the Chinese currency, the yen was thought of in the past, and slowly the dollar's share is declining, but not to the extent that was thought. That it was thought it'd be a more rapid decline. It hasn't declined as rapidly as some people are thinking. Yeah.
I'm here. Okay. I'm confused about Bassett and his comment about China.
Yeah.
Now, if China is doing so well economically, are they still considered a nation that's getting these loans through?
I don't think China gets any of the IMF and World Bank loans. His complaint about them is that their trade practices are unfair to US manufacturers. They don't buy enough.
To me, they're just following our example, doing what a good capitalist would do.
Yes, I agree. No, I would certainly agree with you. Yeah.
Anyone else?
Is there any good news?
We all came out of the pandemic in one piece, or at least most of us. But no, thank you all. I appreciate you all coming. I hope I've been able to enlighten you all about the World Bank and the IMF, and it's been great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Pal. I hope you can join us next week for a presentation that I would imagine is being rewritten as we speak. It's Beth Doherty from Lloyd College, who will be addressing America, the World, Trump 2.0 Foreign Policy. So that should be a barn burner. Thank you very much for coming, everyone. Have a great night. See you next week.